Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Black Men with Purpose podcast. For those of you joining us for the first time, it's a pleasure to have you with us. This is a safe space where we share our thoughts on a multitude of topics in hopes of helping Black males, young and not so young, overcome obstacles and challenges that can be hindrances to happiness, as well as productivity and success. We believe through our experiences, successes, and failures, we can have some conversations that might help other Black males in their respective journeys through this thing we call life. On today's episode, our topic is going to again be education. We felt like we left some meat on the bone after our last episode. So this time we decided to structure it a little bit differently. And instead of just simply talking about education and whatever kind of thoughts came to our mind, we came up with some questions that we're going to talk through. So our very first question that we're going to talk through is: do you think attainment of general knowledge, any information, should be valued above specific knowledge, which is necessary for degree achievement? So, who wants to jump in and tackle that first question?
I'll jump in.
Okay.
And so it depends on I guess what that general knowledge is. I would say there's so many things that we can learn about that don't require going into a classroom and being formally educated on a specific topic. Uh, I think the key is just being committed to learning and growing every day. And I think if we can get that point across, I think that becomes to me uh, way more valuable uh, to individuals because it kind of widens the aperture for the types of things that you're learning, the knowledge and information that you're ingesting, and applying it to the God-given ability that you've already been blessed with. Everyone's been blessed with talents. So so I think for that reason, that probably becomes to me more valuable, even though society says you need to have this specific knowledge if you want to do this job. And I just think if you have the ability to learn, then you can learn the knowledge that it takes to do just about any job, right? Most of the time, you get a degree and you go and apply for a specific job based on that degree. The degree just really tells them that you have the ability to learn, retain information, stay focused long enough and committed long enough to actually attain the degree. But when we hire you, we're actually going to teach you what we want you to know, you know. But it's those other skills that you've developed, your attention to detail, uh, being able to follow up and follow through on things, uh, being organized. Those are the things, and those are the types of skills I think that you learn along the way that will carry you through no matter what job you're doing. So, so for that, I say it's the general knowledge as long as you're committed to being a life learner and willing to develop the skills, get some talents that you already have been blessed with.
Cool.
I agree with Rod. It's no matter what you do, if you're going to be a mechanic, if you're a mechanic that came up in the '70s and you're trying to work on some of these cars today, if you didn't go and learn what's going on today, you're going to be short. So and then the same thing if you're a surgeon, you grew up and you went to school and became a surgeon in the late '80s, early '90s. There's some things that have either with medicine that has become more advanced. Tools to do surgery have become more advanced. So, like Rod said, you just got to be committed and disciplined to be a lifelong learner, regardless if you do general knowledge or specific knowledge. I think either one, if you're committed, you're going to be successful either way. You know, that's the way I see it, you know. And I missed last week, but yeah, if you're an HVAC guy, you know, again, same scenario. What you learned on a house that you worked on 10 years ago, that same system is probably obsolete already. You still got to learn that system because you may run into some folks that still have it, but there's some new systems as well that you have to, you know, be abreast about as well. So
I'll hop in. I think, but I agree with both of you. I looked at it a little bit different. I think that they should be looked at as equal, you know, not one value more over the other. And the only reason I say that is because it really, I think it depends on what the person um, that's doing the learning, what they're trying to accomplish. You know, they might be looking at um, focusing strictly on the college degree where someone else may not be. They may just be looking at the general knowledge. So I look at it as equal. I don't want to say that one is more valuable than the other because it seems like I'm denigrating one of the two. So I look at it as equal, but you're both correct. Everything is changing, and we all have to learn something new every day. Like Byron just said, if a HVAC person, you know, yeah, there's going to be a 10, 15-year-old system out there that they need to learn how to work on. But there may be somebody that has had that knowledge that worked on that 10, 15-year-old system that needs to step into the forefront or step into the future and learn how to work on the newer system. So they have to get that new knowledge in order to stay relevant in that game. So again, I just think they should be looked at as equal. I don't want to denigrate either one.
I guess since we seem to be going in age order, I guess I'm up next.
what you trying to
But
say?
Yeah, what'd you say?
What you trying to say? Age order.
Hey, that's the way this first question seemed to play out. So, for me, and I agree with everything that's been stated so far. I think that both are important, right? I think that there has to be a balance. Um, and I also think that this question can be tackled from so many different angles as well. I think it's almost a loaded question, and it's reminiscent of that whole the question of would you rather know a lot about a little or a little about one thing, right? It's kind of reminiscent of that for me. But I think it's important to have general knowledge. I think your options, um, you open yourself up to a lot of different options when you have a lot of general knowledge about a lot of different topics, right? And I think also it allows you to. I know in the last episode I talked about critical thinking a lot, and I think the more information you have about things, the better the better off you are with regards to being able to critical think and things like that. So I think general knowledge is important, but I also think that having specific knowledge in one area is also important, right? And where you can take something and you can solve a complicated issue in this one specific area that separates you from everyone else, that also opens up some doors for you. But I will go a little bit deeper and say more important than knowledge is understanding, right? If you have knowledge, you can access information, but it's possible to have knowledge while also lacking understanding and wisdom. You can have facts, but not know what those facts mean or what to do with those facts. But if you have understanding, you can kind of extract meaning from the information or from that knowledge. It allows you to be able to see through the facts and into the dynamics or the inner workings of the what, the how, and the why. So understanding is a lens that brings knowledge into focus. So I think it's more important to have, even though I know we're talking about knowledge, I think it's more important to have understanding than it is to have knowledge. That knowledge does you no good if you have no understanding.
Look at that, man. We got all these big words and these philosophical thoughts. I think both of them have their proper place. I think that wisdom, knowledge, understanding, and mastery are a gumbo. And so you got to have the right ingredients. So an example I would use is, let's say you have a lot of knowledge over a lot of different topics, but you don't have any specific knowledge then you lack in that area, and that can be a setback. But then let's just say all you have is specific knowledge and you're like a savant, but then, you don't know how to deal with certain situations. So I think a good mix, like when we went to grade school, we learned reading, writing, and arithmetic. So, I think a good mix, because the specific knowledge helps you focus in somewhere where you're passionate or good. You've been quiet the whole time, and now all of a sudden, it helps you focus somewhere where you're passionate, but then the broad knowledge allows you to kind of look at and be able to kind of evaluate and, put some stuff next to each other and kind of be able to judge across broad spectrum. So I think it's just a good mix of each depending on the situation. I don't think one is superior to the other. So in an HVAC case, yeah, I need you to know HVAC. I don't want you to know the history, of music right now. Let's do your HVAC. But when we sitting down after you finish getting my house all cool and we having some lemonade and you start talking about art and music history, that might make for some dope conversations, So it's my idea on it.
All right. So what's our next question to tackle? If you could change one aspect of our educational systems, what would you change? I'll go ahead and start with this one. This is when I say this is easy for me. I personally think that the entire education system needs to be obliterated. I hear the word reform in so many different aspects of different things, right? I don't like the word reform because generally speaking, reform just means taking what's already broken and reimagining it a little bit. I think in most instances, things need to be obliterated, reimagined, and reconstructed. And I think the education system is that. But for me, the one thing, if I had to take one thing, and I say it's easy for me because I always beat this drum, is standardized tests. I hate standardized testing. First off, the origins of standardized testing, and I won't belabor this for too long, but the origins of it came from this psychologist for the Army during World War One. And he came up with these standardized tests. They were created specifically to segregate soldiers by race, because at the time, science had inaccurately linked intelligence and race. So since that time, racial bias hasn't been removed from standardized testing, right? And at best, they evaluate rote knowledge of math, science, and English at best, right? They have nothing to do. They don't evaluate creativity, problem solving, critical thinking, anything like that. And so I think that something needs to be done. And I know I'm not the only one who feels this way about standardized testing, but it doesn't work. They're not fair. They're racist, amongst a whole bunch of other things. So I'll leave it at that and let someone else talk on it.
All right, I'll jump in, even though I said I wasn't going to follow you anymore last time. But anyway, I'm with you. You said you used the word obliterated. I had wrote down revamped. To me, so it's the same thing. I believe it needs to be there needs to be a complete overhaul. Like you said, the standardized testing. You have to. They're teaching you this one specific area or some parts of this specific areas to get you to pass on to the next grade. Well, that's not necessarily determining your ability to learn. It's teaching you to learn certain parts, but you may be missing everything else because everything you're so focused on that doggone standardized test questions. So I personally think some of the things that they need to include is more life skills. Not all of us had money management. Not all of us knew how to balance a checkbook or, saving money, investing money for sure. Teaching vocational programs, but teaching the basics that everybody is going to need to succeed. Like John said, we all need to learn how to read, write, and have arithmetic skills. But it needs to be, to me, limited. But there's still enough to get everybody to learn, and then you can judge what everybody has learned. But there are things that kids need to know nowadays. the detriment of credit cards and, the importance of a good credit score. There's things that they need to learn that I think is more important than the stuff I think that they're teaching on, like the standardized tests. And I'll yield the floor.
For me, I would say change the priority of where education falls in budgeting. When you look at the different states, I just use Maryland for instance. Maryland had no casinos, and they pushed casinos. Guess what? We're going to fund education, and MGM is the largest casino in the state of Maryland in Prince George's County, but yet Prince George's County is losing teachers by the grove simply because they don't want to pay what they're worth. I know that's down the road for another question, but just changing the priority of education. We'll push to build new stadiums before we build new schools. You know what I'm saying? And I think when it's like if you go to a school that's well equipped, you got the whiteboards, you got computers where each kid has an iPad. They're going to be excited about coming to school, I think. But if the schools itself, the facility, it's got some issues. You got kids going to school in buildings that are 40 or 50 years old. Just overall, I would just change the priority of education, because to me, sometimes I feel like education is not, what was I thinking about this? Not a priority, but we prioritize it lower than we do other things. And we have to understand that, at least in secondary education, county governments and state governments, that's a service that we're doing. There's no return on investment. Our children should be the return on investment. And I think sometimes lawmakers don't look at it as that way. Of course, they want to do things like I said, the stadiums, that's going to bring revenue, that's going to be a return. But our kids, their education has to be our return on investment. That they do well. Some kids are going to go to college, some kids are going to get scholarship to play sports. Other kids, they're going to end up working at Home Depot, and they'll learn to be the manager because they've learned those life skills that Ray was talking about. But guess what they're going to do? They're going to be a productive citizen of the community. They're not going to be in jail, right? They're not going to hit somebody on the head. So I think we just need to change the priority of where we fund and how we take care of the school system or the educational system. That's just my 2 cents.
That's your 2 cents, huh?
But y'all didn't ask me, so.
What? You asked the question. What are you talking about? Y'all didn't ask me. I'm gonna have to agree with Kev. I think it should just be obliterated and reimagined. Set new goalposts. What are our goals for education? If you do any extensive study, and there's so many positive things that came from the formation of schools, but it also became a way to indoctrinate. It became a way to glorify babysitting while people worked at factories at one point in time. There's so many capitalistic elements to the value of school, and then you see those inequities in the working class, how their children get schooled, and how the upper class, how their children get schooled, and you see these inequities. So I'd love to see it reimagined, different goalposts and input, more of a comprehensive system. I remember 10th grade, I basically got kicked out of English because I was bored. So they put me in gifted and talented. And just the way for those next 3 years, the way we did our English, we had projects, we were supposed to create languages. So I started a rebellion against that idea. But I mean, we got to do things like that. So I would just love to see it reimagined. Just break this one off at the roots and reimagine it. So if it was more comprehensive, we're saying it would be one track. If you were going to be like a college student, you were going to do something specific like medicine or something like that, or it'd be a different track if you had entrepreneurial interest and you kind of showed that and graded out well, and we took more time to kind of get to know It's a Bible verse that says, train up a child in the way that they should go, and then they won't depart from it. And we always misquote that. When you break it down for what it's really saying, it's saying discover what's inside of that child and help them discover that so that they can master what's already been put in the child. And so I think we should reimagine education to discover what is in our children instead of tell them what they have to do.
And Rod, before you jump in, let me kind of I agree wholeheartedly. I think both, um, John and B and you too, Ray. Everybody made these solid points about it, and that's one of the reasons why I love alternative schools. And I think as part of this reimagining, I don't know that it'll ever happen, but as part of this reimagining, I think alternative schools need to be a big part of that because, like you said, John, we beat the creativity out of kids by the time they're in first, second grade, right? Creativity is gone. And I think when you have some of these open schools, what do they call it? Unschooling, world schools, magnet schools, all of these different things that they have that are alternative schools, I wish they would be pushed more to the forefront because there's no real standard format. It's like you're allowing kids. And again, I talked about Finland the last time, but Finland gets it right. They absolutely get it right. These kids feel like they're in prison, which is why, and I know we're going to talk later about the whole school systems, if it's ever going to go back to the way it was. And I hope that it doesn't, quite frankly. But kids were happy in this country during the pandemic to not be in school. Whereas you go to a country like Finland, and when they have these open schools and kids are allowed to allow their creativity to flourish and they're able to do the things that's putting them on a path of following their passions in life, they don't feel like they're in prison. So I really do wish that alternative schools would be part of this reimagining. And I'll go ahead and give it to you, Rod. My apologies.
Oh no, you're fine. And so I appreciate that feedback, gents. Like you said, there's so much wrong with the education system. Uh, and so the saddest part for me is that I think a lot of it is by design. That's the to me that's the saddest part of the entire question, the entire education system, is that this country seems to value capitalism above everything else. So if I can capitalize on you, then I'm looked upon finely in this country. No matter what that means for you, right? And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're less than, or you're not as intelligent, or you're not as motivated to be successful. But if I can figure out a way to capitalize on you, then I'm looked upon fondly. Uh, so, so I agree. I think that the system itself needs to be reimagined, and it needs to be reimagined based on what we hope to get from educating young people in this country, right? So we already know that uh, that Rockefeller and his cronies with their foundations had a lot of say in whether or not financial literacy was taught to American children in school. That should be basic, to anything else, teaching young people how money works. Just that understanding. This is how it works, and focused on them being entrepreneurs and producers versus employees and consumers, right? So that's what we're pushing now. You work for someone, you exchange your time for money, or when you get the money, you go spend it over there on that. a bunch of stuff that you don't need. Now you got to find a bigger place so you can keep all this unnecessary stuff that you've accumulated throughout the years. You know, you remember when people used to PCS overseas, you know, get the heavy furniture made. Now they got to, you know, trek it around all throughout the world, wherever they go, you know, because I got this in Turkey. Or I got this from here. So, you know, everybody had a grandfather clock, whether it worked or not, right?
Yeah.
I saw very few that worked, but
Yeah.
everybody
Yeah.
had one, right?
Yeah.
Not realizing what it was going to cost for them to keep it up once they got it back to America. They're like, oh,
Yeah.
no, I got to pay to have that service?
You wrong. You
No,
wrong.
I don't, you know, but that's the reality. And that's what they've ingrained into us. So the question is, you know, if you could change one aspect of the system, you know, what would it be? And one, I think it would be to reimagine what education should look like for our young people, and then make sure that we have a more diverse representation at the table, right? You know, so that public education and good quality education should be available to all people in this country. You know, not just those who can afford to pay for the very high end teachers, so that they can set themselves apart from those growing up in rural America or urban America as opposed to the suburbs. But we have to care enough, right? And be willing and wanting, you know, of the competition it would breed. That's the other part, you know. A lot of people don't want the competition. So if I can pay to not have to compete with you and my family can afford it, hey, that write that check. Because I can't go and debate or have this conversation one on one because I don't have enough depth or breadth, you know, to my knowledge or my understanding. So if you can write a check, then you know we can get me in that seat, and I'm gonna vote whatever you say vote. And unfortunately, you know, the politics has too much say into whether or not our kids are properly educated. But as parents, which is the other aspect of that, as parents, we have to care enough about it to be engaged ourselves. You know, how many times have y'all gone to parent teachers meeting at school and been one of the few dads there?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Come
For
on.
sure. For
You
sure.
know, that's what's wrong with the school system now.
Yeah.
You know, that's why so many young men are in school being unruly now.
Yeah.
There's no men there.
Yeah.
They don't even see that, you know. Positive role model, you know what, someone that can provide some shared experiences, you know. Yeah, we it's a huge issue, and I will get off that tangent, but that's what I think you know, I'd like to see change. But it does, you know, require that parents be engaged and we take it away from politicians.
Well, with that, Rod, man, you hit the nail on the head when you said that everything is by design. And the one thing I would say is, you know, if we just look at the last administration, the money, the money that needs to be going into education needs to be going to the public school systems, not the charter school systems. Those folks can afford to put their kids in the charter schools. And there are more kids in public schools than in charter schools. So if we take the money away from the public schools, well, they're already financially strapped. So you're just going to make everything worse. So the money really needs to be going to the public schools and let the charter schools uh, continue funding themselves the way they have been doing. I just want to make sure I got that in there because that I just feel that's really important that that funding for public schools really needs to be focused on.
Good stuff, fellas. Question number 3. Based on today's inflation and our need for quality education for our young people, what should be the starting salary for teachers?
189,000. Now, I spent some time in PG. I was a sub and I was a teacher for about 3 years. So altogether, I did about 5 years in the system. Um, when you look at some of the teachers' starting salary, I mean, they do have a great progression plan in the sense that, once you earn your bachelor's and you have a bachelor's plus 12 hours toward a master's, the pay scale is more. So, of course, the more education you get, the more your salary will be. But they don't pay teachers enough to deal with some of the stuff they got to deal with. Um, and I'm going to talk about this later on our next question, but a lot of parents in our community don't trust the education system. So they want to come and tell teachers what to do in the classroom. It's almost like if you have a mechanic, you taking your car to the shop, but you're going to go into the shop and tell the mechanic how to fix your car. It's like, why take your car to the shop? Just fix your car at home yourself. You know what I'm saying? And I think sometimes that parents, we think we know more than the teachers, and sometimes those teachers will get, teachers have gone to school to get the certifications. They've gone to school to get the degrees. They've gone to get this education to teach your students, and then sometimes they're, vilified because it's like, oh, you're picking on my child. But I digress. But yeah, the salaries. Again, one thing, again, I'm going back to PG. When I look at when you say, okay, PG is probably what most of them predominantly Black counties in the country. Most of the teachers of color that teach in PG have gone to a HBCU for the most part. But then a couple of months ago, the teachers union proposed an 8% pay increase. PG comes back and said, no, we're only going to give you 4%. And I'm like, wait a minute. So, again, I go back to, you got all these casinos, you got all this money coming into the state, and you want to nickel dime the teachers, whereas the county executives and the board members that are making the decisions for the school system, they are getting pay raises that are, 8 and 10 and 12%, but not the teachers. So again, it just goes back to me, starting salary, it depends on where you are. Depends on, are we going to pay them back for their student loans? It varies, but teachers need to be paid what they work. It's got, because they put up with a lot. After school, the homework they got to grade. They got to have the grades. They got to have 2 grades in the system each week. And if you got 200 kids total, that's a lot of work. They do a lot of work after school. Man, easily $75,000, $80,000 a year to start, just so you can get your feet wet and spend your time being committed to the system. So, but.
Yeah, I actually did look up. I was talking to my friend Ramona earlier, and we were just basically discussing this question. And she sent me to the National Education Association website. And it said, and it basically stopped, it cut off at the 2021 school year, but the average starting teacher salary nationwide was, with a bachelor's, was $41,700. With a master's, it was $45,391. I know a ton of teachers. A lot of my classmates were teachers, and they didn't really do it for the money. The money was nice. They really wanted to be compensated, but that was their passion, was teaching the kids. Their passion is the profession, but they need to be compensated fairly. And I was thinking, $65,000 as the national average, because you guys are right. It varies depending on where you are. I think starting salary in Montana was like 32 or 38,000, somewhere in there. I can't remember what the highest where it was, but I think it was like 65,000, whatever state it was in for starting. So again, it's going to be determined by where you are, but I think the national average should come to at least $65,000. And then the other thing that was sad about it, it was based on the inflation numbers. They actually lost like a 4%. They lost, it was a 4% decrease based on the numbers from 2019 and 2020. Even though they got it, it was like a 1.4% increase, but they really took a 4% decrease because of inflation. And another thing is, there's no reason why a teacher who is teaching our children should have to pay for school supplies for their kids, because the kids may not be able to afford it, or kids' parents may not be able to afford it. That's something else that I think needs to be budgeted to make sure that every child has the necessary pencils, papers, and whatever else that they need, books, correct books, and not these books that are being taken out or removed because somebody doesn't like what it says, namely the politicians. But there's no reason why the teacher should be coming out of pocket to, especially when they're not getting paid enough as it is. But here it is, they're coming out of pocket to make sure that they provide for these kids that they're in charge of. And with that, I yield the floor.
I think what they ought to do is for each area, and for some areas it'll be your metro area. In these rural spots, they can calculate it based on wherever your post office, your courthouse, your market is. But for that specific area, and it depends on whether it's a metro or rural or whatever, for that area, whatever the median rent for a 2-bedroom, 2-bath is, or an average size house, whatever that comes out to, they should take whichever number is greater and pay the teachers 3 times whatever that cost is a month. So, for instance, if your average cost is $2,000 a month, teachers in that area should make $6,000. So that will put you at $7,200 a year. I think they should use that calculation, for, like, say, out here in DC, it might be $3,000. So those teachers would make $9,000 a month. So they'd be, so that's my opinion on how, and that should be the minimum. We should start there and then go up.
Yeah, I like that you actually figured out a formula and a calculation for that, John. For me, in thinking about this question, my thought was kind of the same as what what B and Ray were saying. I think for me, it was tough to try to quantify it, right? Because of those same reasons. Like, cost of living is different in every state, right? And even in some states, the cost of living is different in certain cities, depending upon if it's a metropolitan or whatever the case is. So coming up with a figure was tough. But what I do know is, again, in agreement with B, is that the priority needs to be on education, and teacher salary being part of that. And I know what I'm about to say is one of those sticky, wickets for some people, but I wholeheartedly believe that the police should be defunded, right? And I think in defunding the police, part of what they are defunded should be going to the education system. And again, the education system that also includes pay raises for teachers. I mean, when you think about, and I don't want to harp on this for too long, but when you think about, let's just take Chicago. I was going to say New York, but New York City actually did defund a little bit. So the 2022 budget just for the police force in Chicago is 1.77 billion with a B, $1 billion for 2022. So let's just say you took that 0.77, right? 770 million dollars is what that is. You just took that from the police force. That still leaves the police force $1 billion, which I don't even think they need that. But you take $770 million and you distribute that amongst 7 different things, right? So that's $110 million that you've taken from the police force, and you spread that amongst things like healthcare, right? Things like education, um, uh, affordable housing, mental health, all of these different things, right? Trauma, whatever it is. So if you take $110 million and you give that to the school system, you can take a huge portion of that and ensure that it goes toward and this is for every year, obviously, you can take that and ensure that it goes toward teacher salaries and compensating them fairly. So again, I don't have an actual number in mind. For me, if you ask me, I think they should be making six figures, especially the ones that have longevity, right? They should be making six figures, in my opinion, for what they do. But again, I think the question, I think a lot of people who would listen to this would say, okay, well, you're saying these numbers, but where would that money come from? And that's the reason that I wanted to bring up defunding the police. And you can take it from other areas as well. Just looking at, I noticed that last year in 2021, so many states, just about every state had a surplus in their budget based upon federal grants that were given to them, based upon income taxes exceeding what they thought it would. So they had these surpluses. These surpluses could have gone toward education and increasing teacher salary, but that's not what they did with it. They found other things, less meaningful things, to do with the surpluses that they had for their state. So that's the reason why I wanted to kind of tackle it from that angle, because I really think that some people would be like, well, you're saying this, but where's the money going to come from? So my opinion, that's where the money comes from.
Yeah, your governor wants to spend that money flying immigrants to other states and putting them on buses
Really.
and stuff.
Yeah, no doubt.
If you can match the police budget with the school budget, you'll be great.
Oh my God. Yeah, schools
you
would
figure
be
most states, most counties or whatever, their police budget is going to be 4 or 5 times greater than the school system budget. So
absolutely.
Well, they also need to be taxing these doggone corporations and these billionaires that aren't paying any taxes or paying less than what we're paying. That's where the money can also come from. But they don't want to do that because that's their buddies and their friends. But that's another story for another day.
New York City police budget just this year alone is $10.6 billion. $10.6 billion for their police force in New York City. So on you, Rod.
We can certainly head on to the next question. I think you all gave a lot of insight into that. I am a proponent of kind of establishing a base salary that is influenced by locality and cost of living, right? I also believe that, again, we have to prioritize educating young people.
Absolutely.
That's really the only way that any of it would make sense. And then, holding people accountable. Right? I can pay you 6 figures to be a teacher, and you can come run to be one until you find out that, there's certain things that you're going to be held accountable for, right? So, but if I give you the salary and I give you the resources and I give you the partnership, the support that you need, I'm expecting to see different kids turned out in schools, right? And then for those truant kids whose parents don't make sure they go to school, you really, like you said earlier, you have to break down the entire system and start over. And I think teacher salaries is a huge part of that, because I think in this country, we pay what we value. So.
Yeah.
There you go. So Prince George's County executive probably make what, $500,000?
Maybe just under 300K. I want to say 2 and some change, 2.5. They're over 2. Yeah. So it's superintendent. Superintendent's over 2 as well. 230, 235, somewhere in there.
Well, superintendents of very small districts, in Texas, there's some that probably make 400,000.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that, but what are the teachers being paid?
Yeah.
Yep.
You know,
Yep.
so anyway, we pay for what we value,
Yeah.
and it shows. So, and it starts with having that conversation with your politicians.
Well,
Which is,
Vic goes to a charter school. It's a public charter school, but they really incorporate. Case in point, uh, when George Floyd was killed, they closed school. Say, hey, parents, we send a notice out to you. Take this time to educate your children. When they did a march, when they started protesting, they closed school. Take your kids to the protest so they can know what social justice is all about. The whole
yes.
school was um, Black Lives Matter. Teachers were free to wear the Black Lives Matter or Black Children Matter. One of the other things they did too was, in addition to that, they closed down school specifically to have open discussion and dialogue. They did no education that day. It was all questions. Hey, whatever students you have them write it down and have it bring it to school. And one thing, last thing I say, they do pay their teachers pretty well. KIP do. I had one teacher. She wanted me to help her find another job, and I was working on a resume. I said, "Well, what you looking to make?" She was like, "Well, I'm already making like 95." I was like, "What?" Yeah. So I was like, "Wait a minute, you sure you want to leave?" And she found out because when she tried to go to a neighboring school system with her experience, I think they wanted to pay her 68. So here's a teacher that had a master's degree. She was certified in special ed, and KIP paid her well for that certification and so forth. But other school systems that bordered in the DMV, 68 was the most that she could get. I told her, I think you better stay where you are. Yeah. Plus, and then the other thing they do is like they don't have like classroom numbers. Whoever the head teacher is, whatever their school that they graduated from, that's the name of their classroom. So they're pushing education from kindergarten. You're going to go to college. So your classroom teacher, if your teacher went to Howard or if your teacher went to University of Wisconsin, that's your classroom name. That's not a number. You don't have a number. You actually are affiliated with the education that your teacher receives. So it's a little bit different, but they trying.
That's good stuff. Question 4. What should we do to attract more quality educators to teach our children? And I'll start on this one because I'm going to be pretty short. I think that what we were just discussing is a huge part of it, salaries, right? And any other compensation, not just salary, but also, healthcare benefits and, things like that matter as well. So other benefits and compensations outside of just salary, but salary increases, that's a huge part. I also think that working conditions, um, ensuring that teachers understand that the working conditions are going to be quality working conditions, right? Cultivating professional collaboration, because I think right now they don't have that. I hear a lot of teachers talking about it, and that's not something that they have. They're not involved enough in the decision making. There's not collaboration and shared decision making. So that needs to also be in place. And then other resources, any other resources that can be provided for teachers would also attract quality educators, I think. But again, that's easier said than done. It's going to require that whole obliteration and reimagining and reconstruction in order for those things to happen. And unfortunately, I don't mean to sound pessimistic, but I just don't know that that's going to happen in our lifetime. But I think those are some of the things some of the steps that can be taken to attract more quality educators.
Yeah, so I'll be brief as well because I think it's really simple. Place a greater value on educating young people. Uh, Again, it's sad that in this country we can trace what we value to what we pay our teachers or what we don't pay them, how we don't take care of our roads and bridges and infrastructure, whether or not people can afford decent, safe, affordable housing. Yeah, it shouldn't be that difficult, you know, and not to say that it's a simple problem, but I think if we had enough people in charge of these systems and institutions and politicians that really cared, it could be better than it is. So I think, valuing, educating children, because that would make teachers feel more supported than they do now. We're asking them to do a lot. So we're not going to pay them well, but we're going to ask them to babysit our kids. We're going to ask them to deal with behavioral issues. We're going to ask them to make sure that they keep our kids safe, because we have guns running rampant in the streets. Then we're going to ask them to deal with belligerent parents who are not involved. It's a lot. Oh, and spend your own money buying resources so that you can make your classroom the best learning environment it can be.
Yep.
They couldn't melt and pour a teacher job. With all those things in place, you literally would have to be doing it just because you love the challenge and the opportunity to educate young people. There would be no other reason for it other than to be stressed out and walking around worrying, And the idiots that talk about giving teachers guns, really? But that's where we are, and I think we have to have those conversations, but we need to look at what we could actually do to attract folks to that profession. Over.
Well,
you in? Okay.
Go ahead, Brian. Go ahead, John. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, everything is spot on. I think what Rod said, though, the people that come and do the job now, man, they do it because they love it. You talk to people that are in education, they love it because they already are underpaid and they spending money out their pocket and they care about these children. Like, because we always have that, these lazy teachers. But I mean, it's kind of like something we used to talk about in the military. Why does a good leader have to be an outlier? You should consistently have quality leaders throughout your career, and not say, I had a career and I had one or two leaders that stood out. Teachers, we want them to be superheroes to be standard, but like if we paid them better, gave them better supports. I mean, I'm a homeboy, man. Let me tell you, HEB is probably one of the best grocery chains in the world. And HEB, when they upgrade, they don't just upgrade the ones in the suburbs. Like if they gonna do a facelift, the one around the corner from the projects is gonna get that same facelift and everything. And if we took school as a brand, like sometimes what kind of neighborhood you in by the schools. Like they got those overhead projectors from the 70s in there. And then you go to other schools and they got, iPads.
Whiteboards, yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So I mean, it's just so much. But I think a good start would be equitable pay and, some supports, well-compensated student aides, not as much as the teachers because they're student aid, but still, student aides, and to make sure that it's a safe space. Just start with that basic. I don't even think you got to do nothing crazy creative to attract quality educators, because the job still comes with all this stress, and we still have these amazing educators that come to do the job already. So just be fair. That would be a great start.
Right.
Imagine that, right?
Yeah, and that's, I again, I agree with what everybody said here. I mean, the first thing is, of course, increased pay. That's the first thing. Um, you guys you were spot on when you said these teachers do it because the love of the profession. I'm telling you, I have way too many friends that they don't refer to the kids as their students. Those are their babies. Those are their babies. Those are their kids. That's who they are there for those kids, and they worry about those kids, and they take care of those kids, and they sacrifice for those kids. One thing I would love to see included in there as well is a student loan repayment or forgiveness program, because we know a lot of those teachers had to go and get student loans to be able to get that continue or that college education. So I would say, they have to have a minimum amount of years of service, um, to get the student loan repayment or forgiveness. But that's something that definitely should be offered to them, even if it started out, a little bit after the first year and it progressed on. I think that would be a good program for them, to incentivize them to. Or incentivize people to remain in the school systems, or at least the public school systems. I thought about trying to make it a result-based uh, program. However, um, that only works if the parents are involved. And we've talked about that multiple times today. If the parents are just dropping them off and saying, "Hey, they're your problem," I'm not worrying about. They don't check report cards, they don't check progress reports, but all of a sudden they're wondering why their child is failing at the end of the year. The parents have got to be involved. Otherwise, a result-based program for student loan repayment or forgiveness, it would not work, because the teachers are already working hard enough, and that's an unfair task to put on them when they're not receiving the the parental support. So that's all I had.
And I think
But you,
uh, man, let's have a car buying program for the teachers. Pay back the student, help them pay back their student loans. You know what I'm saying? I mean, we expect our teachers. When you think about it, we expect our teachers to work miracles with some of these kids, and some of these kids come to school with some issues. I was there. There's kids that have a jacked up home life that come to school, and we expect those teachers to deal with the issues that they have at home, trying to get them focused. And some of the time the kids can't get focused till after lunch anyway, because they still thinking about what happened to them yesterday in the neighborhood or whatever. So yeah, it's they deal with a lot. They deal with a lot. Compensation is definitely going to be a help, but let's give them something that's really going to help the teachers. It's a profession that's unique to somebody who loves our kids. Let's look out for them and let's take care of them. I don't see nothing wrong with making sure if a teacher needs to have a car to get to school, let's. I mean, if Ford does it, if GM does it with the federal government, right? They have cars, they have a car buying program, they'll sell the government a car at a reduced rate. Why we can't do that for teachers? Give them something, make them feel like they're valued, because at the end of the day, some teachers, depends on what school system you're in. Yeah, you're gonna have those parents that are gonna bake you some cookies, that's gonna send apples, that's gonna buy you a gift at Christmas time. But you got some teachers, it's like, no, that ain't the neighborhood I roll in. I'm just fortunate to have a job at the end of the week. So yeah, let's do something out the box for our teachers, and make that the standard. Let's do something for them different, and then make that the standard. That's how you're going to attract more people to, money talk. Give them a bonus. Give them a $10,000 bonus for coming into the program. Let them defer their student loans for the first 2 years. Something different, so they will say, okay, this is worth staying for. But yeah, we definitely need to compensate. We definitely need to, like y'all said earlier, we definitely need to revamp the system. So, and part of that revamping is we got to do something different and creating an avenue to and compensate those teachers, man, for sure.
Absolutely, yeah, no doubt. All right. Well, we had a few more questions. However, we are over time, so we'll have to find some other time to tackle those three questions, and they're really good. So I certainly want us to be able to circle back to them in the not too distant future. Does anyone else have anything to add before we wrap this episode? All right. Well, with that, we want to thank each of you for taking the time to join us. And as we wrapped up this week's episode, I want to leave you with a quote by the great poet and philosopher Jay-Z, who stated, "I believe everybody in the world is born with genius level talent. Apply yourself to whatever your genius at, and you can do anything in the world. Remind yourself, nobody's built like me. You design yourself." Until next time, peace.